Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Leslie presents. And now your host, Paul Leslie.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure to welcome the one and only Will Lee. Thanks so much for joining us.
Greetings, it's my pleasure. It's nice to be here. How are you guys doing?
We are doing fantastic. It's
all right.
It's been a long time that we've been corresponding, so it's great to finally bring this into the reality.
I appreciate your patience. I know how it's been, and you've been great about this. Thank you. It's great to finally connect.
Who is Will Lee?
Well, that's a loaded question. I guess that's a different answer for everybody who gets asked that question. You know, in England, they would say that's your penis. But that's a whole other story. We're not going there. If you're a Sesame Street fan, you'd say, oh, that's the actor that played Mr. Hooper's real name, right?
Right.
I don't know if you know that, but that's a little bit of trivia. When the Will Lee actor guy died, I actually got a note handed to me from backstage at the Letterman show saying, I was a really good friend of Will Lee, the actor's, and you still have his name. Please carry it on respectfully and proudly.
How do you think
so
you're doing?
I hope I do. I'm no Mr. Hooper, I'll tell you that. But Will Lee these days is a working musician, very happy to be working, happy to have a job, and happy to be in music, which I love the most. And I don't take it for granted for 1 minute. I really love serving the music, making it as good as I can.
What was life like growing up in the Lee house?
Oh, boy. Well, you know, we were Texans, and in a small town called Huntsville, Texas, where my father was the head of the music department of the Sam Houston Institute of Technology. You've probably heard of it, SHIT. No, that's just a joke. Actually, it was called Sam Houston State Teachers College at the time, and my parents were both very heavily into jazz. So musically speaking, the Lee household was always filled with music. My mom was a singer, a la sort of Sarah Vaughan in that style of jazz singing. My dad was a bebop piano player at heart and a jazz educator as a livelihood. He could support his 4 kids. I'm the oldest of 4. My brother Rob, my sisters Pat and Peg are below me in age. So it was fun. We all sang together and, you know, enjoyed being together, and we're still close.
Can you remember specific songs that you heard playing around the house?
I can tell you that as far as I can remember, when I was very young, I remember the sound of Miles Davis' muted trumpet. So I guess that could have been around the Kind of Blue era, maybe. I'm not sure what year that album is, but that was the first thing I remember hearing. And my parents also were big, you know, as I said before, fans of Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald. And, you know, we heard a lot of Joe Williams in the house, and we heard quite a good bit of Cannonball Adderley and Nancy Wilson. So, you know, and Miles Davis. And Bird, Charlie Parker, who Dad had played with.
How did you come to fall in love with the bass?
Oh, boy. Well, that was not an overnight love at first sight thing. That was a matter of, you know, necessity when we were like 11 or 12 years old as kids in bands, and all the kids our age had the mentality of either drums or guitar. The functionality of bass was probably something that was a little bit over a young kid's head at that time. First of all, bass was a brand new instrument, very young instrument. And we're talking about like 1964, you know, 65, just after the Beatles hit America. So, you know, I was the drummer in our band, which we had put together. The band consisted of 2 guitar players, drums, and then we added a sax player. But I felt it would have been really nice to have filled out the sound and make us sound just a little bit more professional. So I decided we needed a bass player. Unfortunately, nobody our age played bass. So we hired a drummer, and I said, I'll just play bass, like it was nothing. Meanwhile, I was the lead singer of the band, and I hadn't realized how tough it was going to be to play bass and sing. So once we had hired the drummer, it was kind of too late to fire him, so I just kind of went for it, you know, and it was pretty humbling to try to be able to, you know, keep singing lead and now playing bass underneath that vocalizing. But, I kept sticking with it, and now it's like, it's my passion.
Are there any other instruments that you tinker around with?
I still play a bit of drums. We have this Beatles band, the Fab Faux, a very successful national touring kind of act. We go out every weekend. The Fab Faux plays strictly Beatles music, and sometimes I'll go back and play drums when our drummer comes up to front to sing a lead solo. And I play a little bit of keyboards, a little bit of guitar in that band. And I mess around on those instruments at home as a songwriter. I kind of play keyboards, at about the level of a basic 5-year-old.
There have been a lot of interviews with great bass players on this show, and I've asked a lot of them who their favorite bassist are. Who do you think the best bassist is? And there's been a lot of answers. But the name Will Lee has been on a few people's list. So who is on your list?
Oh, man, and my list is huge. You have to go with the masters that most people know about. Larry Graham. Jaco Pastorius is way high on the food chain. Chuck Rainey is my all-time favorite bass player. Of course, Larry Graham, the father of thump and slap funk. For finger funk, you've got the Pino Palladino, Rocco Prestia, a lot of studio players from New York who I came up with. Marcus Miller, Neil Jason, Sal Cuevas, great Latin bass player. Ray Brown from the upright jazz world, as far, in addition to Paul Chambers, and a guy who no day goes by without me thinking about Mr. James Jamerson, the sound of Motown. It's way up on the top of the list as well. And many, many others.
You've done a lot of session work over the years. What was the first one?
Oh, my first session in New York?
Yeah, your first...
Or my first session, period.
Yeah, first session, period.
I think the first time I ever went in the studio was with a band that we had in Miami when I lived in Florida. It was called The Loving Kind. The Loving Kind. And that was very exciting. We went into Criteria recording studios there where lots of great hit records were made, and did a song that we performed on a local American bandstand style type show on a Saturday. I think we lip-synced to our recording that we had done. That was pretty cool. It was pretty exciting.
You played on so many people's records. Is it possible for you to pick a favorite session?
Well, there's lots of favorite moments in the studio. The outcome of some of the sessions have been, better or not as good as the sessions themselves. But there's one in particular that Steve Gadd and I both agree on that we played on that was one of the most fun and best unknown records that we ever did. And it was the New York Community Choir. And we did 2 albums with this choir in New York, and both of them are so filled with joy. I think everybody should go out and pick them up as fast as they can. I think there's some of it has been appearing lately as reissue on like maybe iTunes or maybe as imports, or I think you can find it on Amazon. But it's the New York Community Choir, NYCC. And there are 2 albums that we did, and both of them are really, really special.
There's someone I wanted to talk about in particular. You played on a lot of his albums. Our past friend, his music is still very much alive, Mr. Ralph McDonald. What was it like recording with Mr. McDonald?
Oh, boy, Ralphie. Well, Ralph, there's so many layers to my relationship with Ralph. One of them is our personal friendship, which was very, very strong and forever, is dear to my heart. And I'm forever influenced by Ralph's positivity that he gave me as a musician and friend. In fact, he gave me my nickname, Uncle Will, which he'll call me to this day. The Ralph McDonald musician that we all know about, responsible for writing all those great songs like Where Is the Love, Mr. Magic, and, of course, just the 2 of us, and many other album cuts and songs that we've heard a lot of, is a guy who I can say very confidently is the person who introduced pop percussion playing to records. He's the guy who knew what to play on the tambourine, knew what to play on congas, knew what to play on cowbell, shaker, and exercised the utmost elegance and taste in everything he played. So, if you were to look at a discography of Ralph McDonald, you'd be shocked, sure, at how many great records that he made happen.
How did you come to meet Paul Shaffer?
Well, back in the days when I was, same as today, I was a musician for hire. And in one instance, I had a lot of success with being on a lot of Barry Manilow records and a lot of other records. And he came down from Canada, and he was seeking out a rhythm section of guys that he'd heard of, and a producer that he knew from some of the Manilow hits, a guy by the name of Ron Dante, who a lot of people out there may know him as the voice of the Archies. He's a very, very special, very talented guy. Ron was Barry Manilow's producer, and Paul Shaffer had gotten in touch with Ron to produce a demo that he was doing with a guy named Paul Jabara, who's now deceased. Paul Jabara is the guy that wrote Last Dance for Donna Summer, and also co-wrote It's Raining Men with Paul Shaffer. But anyway, Paul had hired Ron Dante to get us all together in the studio to record some of these songs that he was arranging and writing with Mr. Paul Jabara. So Shaffer and I met in the studio on the first day of these recordings, and we hit it off right away as great friends, and we've been really close ever since. I couldn't believe how nice of a guy this guy from Canada was, Paul Shaffer, and what a great talent and great ear he had, and how much he knew about music and how aware he was of what I had done by the time he got to New York from Canada way back in the 70s. So we always had a great relationship.
What do you think about Paul Shaffer as a musician?
Well, Paul Shaffer is a guy who is so well schooled. He can read music really well, but his hearing and his ears are so great. When he picks up something that he listens to, and he has a chart in front of him, I'm surprised he can even look at the chart, because his ears take over and sort of always tell him what to play. He's like a walking archive of music history too. He's really a guy that knows so much about pop music, and it's really hard to fool him. Yeah, I always look to him to try to find out what's the right part in the song that I'm playing right now, especially if it's a cover song that we're trying to duplicate or something on the set at Letterman, or even in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremonies, or wherever we play together.
Just a few minutes ago, you were talking about Barry Manilow, and both you and Sid McGuinness, you both played on Barry Manilow's albums. What is Barry like to work with in the studio?
Well, Barry is he's like a real arranger, a real guy who knows how to orchestrate horns and strings and stuff. So he's a very schooled, accomplished musician who really knows his stuff.
There have been so many great, great acts that have played on the Letterman show, and you've gotten to play with so many of them. What are some of the favorite acts that you've just had to pinch yourself and thought, man, I'm going to get to play with him tonight, or I'm going to get to play with her tonight? Who are those people?
Oh, man, there's so many. I mean, Melissa Etheridge used to be almost a regular on the band. We would play with her. Dr. John has been on the show a few times. Stevie Wonder came and started testing the band, started singing obscure songs, and thanks to Paul Shaffer, we could jump right in on them. But the number one musical guest of all time, without a doubt, was James Brown when he came on the show, especially in the very early days of Letterman, like maybe in 82, 83, came on and brought a couple of his own horn players, but used our band to back him up, and it was just incredible. That was the greatest.
Just kind of as a what-if kind of question, if Letterman was going to retire soon, what would you do?
I'd probably take a nap. Probably sleep for the first few hours I've had in a long time. And then I would probably maybe skip out of town for a little vacation. And of course I would get antsy and come right back and probably continuing working on my record, my own solo CD that I'm working on.
So tell us about that. Is this a follow-up to O, or what is it?
Well, yes, actually, I have so many unfinished pieces of music that I'm actually finishing up and trying to record that I think it would be more than a follow-up. I think at this time I'm probably working on about 3 albums.
Oh, awesome.
And I got some great people playing on great tracks. I just did a track with Billy Gibbons and Alan Toussaint, and I'm just doing one song at a time and seeing how it goes, and everything's coming out really nicely.
Is there any tentative date that will be coming out, or?
Well, I'm trying to get the first batch of stuff out by October.
Oh, wow, fantastic.
And since this is 2012 we're talking about, I'm talking in October 2000. So I'm busy.
Tell us about the Fab Faux. How did that come to be?
Oh, the Fab Faux is a miraculous thing that we formed in 1998. And it started when I was doing a little mini tour of Europe with the late, great Hiram Bullock. And Hiram used to always want to have a trio of three guys that played and sang. He could get three-part harmony going. And he actually, had kind of exhausted his supply of singing drummers. Nobody was available for this particular little tour that we were doing. So in came a guy named Rich Pagano, who I'd never met before. And when Rich came and started playing with us, I could hear right away that he was very Ringo influenced in his tuning of his drums and the way he played. And the way he sang was quite a lot like John Lennon. So, as much of a Beatles freak as I've always been, I never had thought of having a Beatles band until I met this guy, Rich Pagano. And after the tour was over, it kind of dawned on me it'd be fun to go on stage and play Beatles music as if we were bringing the records to the stage, note-for-note detail stuff. And I knew right away that a four-piece band wasn't going to work because you'd have to have, you want to hear all those great percussion parts and doubled vocal harmonies and keyboard parts and stuff that are on the Beatle records, where I think a lot of Beatle bands have made the mistake of trying to look like the Beatles. Maybe not a mistake, that's probably a bad way to phrase it, but they've suffered and they've settled for having a four-piece band, which really doesn't allow you to have all those great luxurious sounds. So I knew right away that it needed to be a five-piece band. And, the genesis was, first calling Rich, having him say yes, and then asking Jimmy Favino if he would kindly join our band, because I knew he was a guy like Paul Shaffer who really was a musical historian and archivist who could really focus on getting all those details right and knew what some of those details were supposed to be better than I did in many cases. And then we met two other guys, a guy named Jack Petrozelli and a guy named Frank Agnello, and that completed the five-piece band. And then we got busy and got started on trying to see what we could do as a five-piece band to make it sound as much like the records as possible. And that's been many years of trials and tribulations and lots of successes and lots of really great moments on stage replicating these fantastic Beatle albums and singles and stuff. So it's been really a great trip so far.
What was it like for you when you heard Paul McCartney had given you props as a bassist?
That was a moment that was actually kind of hard to take, for me. It was really a tearful moment, one that I still can't sort of relish and take great pride in, knowing that, he has some respect for me as I do for him. I don't think he'll ever be able to know how much influence he's had on me and every other bass player, and actually anybody who has ever tried to think melodically, in this pop world that we have. So it's been incredible to see that in print.
Yeah.
To see Paul McCartney saying, any great bass players that you dig, and have him say, well, Will Lee and Dino Palladino come to mind, and have me included in that statement was pretty amazing.
Yeah, magical.
Yeah.
Oh,
humbling, at least.
Tell us about the gig that they did. This was, I think it was 2 years ago when they played on top of the marquee there.
Oh, yeah, that was really fun. Well, here the Letterman show takes place at the Ed Sullivan Theater, which to me means the place that the Beatles first were seen in America, and which really changed the shape of all pop music from that day forward, when the Beatles hit the scene, and showed us what they looked like and, fashion-wise, and they took a lot of chances, and they were very confident, and they knew they were getting over, and it was incredible. So to see him return to that stage, to that building where he and his other bandmates, the rest of the Beatles, changed the course of history, all I could say to him was, welcome home.
What was recording the Birdhouse album with your dad like?
Well, my dad was a bebopper, and his view of what music should sound like is all about 4/4 jazz and how well something can swing and how well a song is composed. And he had a little history with playing with Charlie Parker Bird, who kind of laid down the law as far as what bebop is supposed to sound like. And my dad was a great improviser himself, and we thought great place for he and I to come together would be in a setting of Charlie Parker's material. So we went in the studio as father and son with a bunch of other great musicians, Billy Hart on drums, and we invited other guys to perform with us, Randy Brecker and Michael Brecker and Lou Soloff on trumpet, and the great Bob Duro on vocals, and John Tropez on guitar. And we got together and played a bunch of Charlie Parker material in our own sort of way. And, it was heartwarming to look over and see Dad playing piano with me in the studio, something that had never happened before. So it was a wonderful experience to have something on tape, so to speak, something recorded with my dear dad, who just recently deceased. So it's a great memory and a great keepsake of our musical relationship.
As someone who has performed on so many albums, has performed with so many great artists of our time, has recorded albums of his own, all the things that you've done, do you still have some dreams that you want to pursue? What are they?
Well, for me, I have a ton of things that I would love to finish writing. I keep these crazy ideas in my head, and I just want to see them through. So for me, it's like to try to finish these crazy songs that I've started writing. And, that's kind of how O happened, my first solo album. There's quite a few original pieces of music on there. So, just to kind of nurture these tunes that I've written, and I try to be a writer who's not derivative. I don't try to, do my version of this other person's song or anything like that. I try to just go with my instinct and see how far I can take it. So, for me, I have sort of an endless supply of unfinished ideas. I want to keep working on them until they're finished and move on to the next song. And that's how these songs are coming for this new album or set of albums that I'm doing right now.
What is the best thing about being Will Lee?
For me, it's being the husband of Sandrine Lee. That's the best thing about being Will Lee. Sandrine is my wife, who I'm very proud of, who's a great, great person, who's an amazing photographer, who is having a lot of success as a photographer these days. And you can look at her website, sandrinelee.com. That's SANDRINELEE.com, and see some of what she's up to. She's just fascinating for me to watch her grow.
She did the photography for one of Ralph's albums, if I remember. Isn't that correct?
That's true.
Yeah.
Homegrown, and then the next one, another one called Mixed Emotions.
Oh.
And she's also the photographer of Esperanza Spalding's 2 CDs, Pat Metheny's last album, and Mike Stern's next album, and many, many, many other things she's doing.
For my last question, for anyone who's listening to this, wherever they are, whenever they hear it, what would you like to say to all the people listening in?
Boy, that's a loaded question, man. I think I actually have an answer for that. If anybody's listening, this country of ours has become way, way more divided than I've ever seen, and there's really no sense in that at all. I think the only way we're ever going to be able to move forward as a country and as fellow human beings is just to put our differences aside and start loving each other.
Well spoken. Mr. Lee, it's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Paul. I sure appreciate your time, and again, you're waiting for this interview to happen.
Well, it happened.
Good man. Thank you.
All right, man. Hang in there. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care of yourself.
Bye-bye.
This common language that we